the Wharton Baker Retail Center and XRC Labs, a venture fund and accelerator focused on consumer goods and retail technology, are pleased to present our fourth and final session on the future of retail innovation. Having nurtured or invested in many direct-to-consumer brands between us, we thought we would visit the future of DTC. As we all know, DTC brands took the market by storm over the last 10 years, disrupting old ones across almost every category imaginable. But this market has become more complicated because while it's cheaper than ever to launch new brands, the cost of promoting and growing these new brands has never been higher. To explore this topic and lead this discussion, I am super excited to introduce Barbara Kahn, Patty and J.H. Baker Professor of Marketing, Wharton School of Business, who will be leading this great panel. Barbara, take it away.
Thank you very much. And it's a real pleasure to be here. And I'm really delighted to introduce our panel, who are exactly the right people to talk about this topic. So let me start with the introduction of Tony Shan. He serves as the head of the Americas for Alibaba Group. Their Alibaba Group's cross-border B2C platforms, which are T-Mobile Global and Koala. He also leads a team of category experts in North America, working with brands, retailers, and SMEs, which are small to medium enterprises to sell into the growing Chinese market. So hello, Tony, and welcome to this panel.
Hello.
And now I'd like to introduce Coral Chung, who's the founder and CEO of Senreve. Senreve is the global direct-to-consumer luxury handbag brand. It was launched in 2015, and the brand gained resonance for its stylish yet versatile bags. Senreve joined T-Mobile Global in September 2020. Coral is an entrepreneur, a former strategy consultant, and a tech executive who began her career at Bain, where she advised Fortune 500 companies on retail strategy. Coral is a Huntsman Scholar from the University of Pennsylvania and the Wharton School. Hello, Coral.
Hi, Barbara. Thanks for having me.
Nice to have you here. And finally, last but obviously not least, we have Travis Boyce, who's the head of global retail operations at Allbirds. Allbirds is a San Francisco-based environmentally sustainable shoe brand that markets its famous sneakers as the most comfortable in the world. Allbirds launched its store on Tmall in 2019. Travis leads the team's dynamic retail strategies. He previously held operations and finance positions at Chobani, Morgan Stanley, the FRS company, and Zazzle. He works alongside Allbirds co-founder and co-CEO Joey Zwillinger, who is an alum of the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania. Hello, Travis.
Thanks for having me, Barbara.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. And so as you can see, we have just the right people to discuss this topic. Before we get into the role of these brands and going into China and what role Alibaba plays, let's just start with the general theme of the whole panel and talk about why DTC in the beginning, why DTC is right now. What are the advantages? What are the disadvantages? Is this a decision that's changed since the pandemic? Let's start with Travis and telling us why Allbirds went direct to consumer.
Certainly, I think there's a number of reasons for us, but a couple key ones. One, we build products with premium materials, and those materials we want to offer to customers at an affordable price that we think is approachable. And so by removing the intermediary, the wholesaler, we're able to offer our customers an approachable and attractive price for materials like merino wool, superfine merino wool that can often be quite expensive. The other, and I think most important for me personally, is the direct connection we have with our customers. We have relationships with every single one. We sell to them directly through our sites or through our stores, and are able to build a relationship and really get a lot of feedback from our customers that is a little bit more difficult through a wholesale experience. And it gives us a tremendous advantage as we look to improve both our experience and our products.
So controls price and direct to consumer gets the data directly from the consumer. Coral, is that the same for you, or are there other considerations?
Similar considerations, but other ones as well. For Senreve, we're a premium luxury brand, and we focus on having very high quality manufacturing and materials, mostly manufactured in Europe, in Italy and Spain. And so for us, we were seeking to revolutionize luxury by providing a more accessible luxury product that's at a disruptive price point. So there is definitely a price point consideration in terms of cutting it out the retailer. But at the same time, we were really focused on having a direct relationship with the consumer, not just from a data perspective, but from an overall end-to-end customer experience perspective. And a lot of the retail platforms, especially in the deep digital native environment, didn't allow us to tell the full story of the brand, to highlight the values of the brand in terms of female empowerment and so forth, as well as showcase the distinctive features of the product in a unique way. So we felt that we need to create our own community and environment to do that and have that direct relationship with our customers.
Yeah, and we're seeing that general trend with a lot of other luxury brands, with the idea of really controlling not just the data from the customer experience, but the entire customer experience really is a benefit of direct to consumer. We have seen it in these luxury brands and in these categories. We're talking about apparel now. But what's really interesting, during the pandemic, we started to see a lot of the CPG brands go direct. They've maintained their wholesale distribution, but they've also opened up a direct channel digitally to control that customer experience. It's kind of interesting because we really didn't see that too much from the CPG firms before the pandemic. So let's talk now to Tony and give us a little bit of an overview of Tmall and Tmall Global and what the platform's differences and benefits are. And maybe if you would, contrast that with some of the ones we know better in the West. What's different between Alibaba and, let's say, some little player named Amazon?
Sure, of course. So our audience might be wondering why a platform is here to speak about DTC brands' growth opportunities. But I think that is one of the major market differences between China and here in the US, as DTC brands can benefit from selling on our platforms to Chinese consumers. Many people have heard of Alibaba and our e-commerce platforms, Tmall and Tmall Global, but they might not be so clear on how these platforms function, as there are still many myths about what we do and can offer to these global brands. We get the comparison that we are the Amazon of China quite a lot. So although we think there are some similarities between the two, the retail environment we operate in is so different. So I don't think there's a perfect comparison for what we do to here in the West. The most important difference is that we are a marketplace, not a retailer. So we only do well if the brands and merchants on our platforms do well. So our interests are wholly aligned, as we don't compete with our merchants. And then everything that we are innovating and improving is to help the brands on our platforms succeed, from building their brands to engaging with our consumers, and of course, to sell their products. We provide the infrastructure, the marketing tools, consumer analytics, traffic, payment, logistics, the full gamut for brands to sell to more than 800 million consumers shopping on our marketplaces. So you can think of Tmall and Tmall Global as these digital malls where brands can set up their own online stores to target and engage with these consumers through their own brand storytelling, their own pricing, assortment planning, and then utilizing various marketing channels to drive them into their stores and then convert them into consumers.
So that's a really big difference in my mind between Alibaba and Amazon. I mean, Alibaba is the platform and does not compete directly, whereas Amazon does compete directly with the brands. And that obviously sets up a very different environment. So it's interesting though, because what we have here are two direct to consumer brands, and both of them have decided to go on this platform and not go into China direct. They've decided to partner with Alibaba. So why is that? Let's start with Carl this time and tell us why you've partnered with Alibaba and what is the role of this in your growth strategy. And maybe you can also talk about how important the China market is, particularly for a luxury brand like yours.
Yes, absolutely. China is a really critical and strategic market for us. And as you mentioned, Barbara, we're only a 4.5-year-old company. So just a quick background on myself. I was born in China and grew up in California, but always had a very bicultural mindset and a global mindset when founding Senreve. So even though we launched in the US, China was always going to be a critical market for us. And I think that was embedded into the DNA of the company from the very beginning. So that was always a critical part of our strategy in terms of designing our products, our supply chain, and so forth. So in terms of starting to dip our toes into China, we actually did a lot of direct activities in terms of pop-ups, offline activities, online activities in terms of partnerships with KOLs and influencers and so forth. And we realized that there was a lot of demand and product market fit, but we needed scale and we needed access to consumers. And Alibaba and Tmall had a massive, massive platform that has existing traffic. And I think one of the distinctive things for us from a category and price point perspective is also that Tmall Global has access to consumers that buy these types of products that are more premium, that are more luxurious on this platform versus like an Amazon, for example, that's more for mass consumer products. So that was another big difference for us that we saw, particular to Senreve. And lastly, we do think about it as a partnership. So Tmall and Alibaba has been extremely supportive of our brand. From day one since launch. We get a lot of access to consumer demographics data, which then informs where we would potentially expand offline and physical locations. So it's a continuous dialogue and partnership. There's a lot of data sharing, which is super helpful for us. And we've learned a lot about our consumer in China, their taste, and we've done a lot of product localization as well based on that.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, I didn't realize you're Chinese, thinking about it from China always from the beginning. Obviously, we think about luxury and China going together. A lot of the growth in luxury has come from China. So that's an interesting reason to go into China now. And Allbirds, Travis, that you don't have that heritage. I don't see you being Chinese, or so you're a New Zealand American brand. Why? And a lot of these brands that started direct to consumer in the US, many of them have not followed you and gone into China. So that's kind of an interesting play for you. Why did Allbirds decide to go into China and to partner with Alibaba?
Yeah, there's a few reasons there. One, we started to see some really strong demand signals, both online in terms of people sort of coming to look at our site and visit from sort of parts of Asia, but China in particular, and even sort of on a more sort of anecdotal sort of piece of evidence, our stores started to see an influx of Chinese customers coming in to buy significant amounts of product and wanting to bring them home to their families. And we saw this demand that we weren't meeting, and we started to see brands that we might want to that were maybe trying to sort of emulate us to some degree in China. And so we went over and we went in a really meaningful way. We invested in our own retail right out of the gates. We have 4 of our owned and operated stores in major Chinese cities that we continue to run to this day and have been extremely successful. We do have our own direct site, but Tmall is such a strong partner. And for a lot of the reasons Coral mentioned, it was a no-brainer for us out of the gates to make sure we had that visibility, that we had that awareness, and to help build that in a digital way alongside our physical footprints. And so it was not always part of the plan to go into China. I think we started to react when we saw those demand signals, and it's been a tremendous experience for us to enter that market.
So I'm really curious when you say that, because a lot of what Allbirds' mission is this environmental sustainability mission. Is that resonating with Chinese consumers?
Yeah, I think to Coral's point, as we entered China, I think we knew we would have to adjust the way we communicate the sort of the key parts of our brand. We weren't going to change who we are as Allbirds, but certain topics resonate more deeply with the Chinese consumer. I would say for us, a lot about the material storytelling. Merino wool is such a sort of high quality premium textile that was something that resonated quite in a meaningful way. And then we can start to talk about the impact on the environment. And I think it is something that's starting to pick up steam in China as well. But there were sort of tweaks and things we sort of massaged a little bit around our brand and how we tell the story. And it's the same that we do in other markets as well, that we don't just try to force the American dialogue or the American brand upon other countries, but really try to localize and meet the customer there in a way that is going to resonate for them.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting conflict between the global brand mission and the local implementation. People have always thought about that, but it's interesting in this in this instance with what your brand's DNA really is and how that might translate into the Chinese market. Tony, maybe you can help us a little bit with what's going on in China and, give us some context on what's happened in China since the pandemic. They were way ahead, I believe, in retail before the pandemic than the US. And a lot of the things that we've seen happening in the US are kind of copycatting in some sense what Alibaba started with new retail. So that was happening before the pandemic. What's happened since the pandemic, and how is the Chinese consumer recovering to all these changes?
Yeah, for sure. I think, as consumer shopping behavior have changed a lot this past year as a result of the pandemic, both in terms of where they shop and how they shop. And so for a brand, it's important to really think about the digitization of reaching these consumers, which I think a lot of the DTC brands can really excel at and really better use e-commerce as a way to reach these consumers. And especially as global travel is going to be restrictive in the near future, these Chinese consumers, they aren't able to travel and shop abroad. So a lot of the budget spending for travel are more likely to go to shopping and then also consumption online. So for a brand, being where these consumers are would be, the first step. And then after that, it's really about how you reach and interact with them. And since they can't physically touch or feel these products, digital tools such as live streaming, product descriptions, short form videos will be crucial for brands to not only consider, but to activate. And these should be very familiar with it for the DTC brands.
I'd really like you to go a little deeper on this notion of live streaming, because what I've heard was live streaming just took off like a rocket in China during the pandemic. Can you tell? And I don't think we're seeing that in the US. So can you go a little deeper on what that means in China?
Yeah, so China's live streaming e-commerce is really experiencing explosive growth, especially this past year with the pandemic. Our Taobao Live platform for live streaming has been growing for the last couple of years, both in terms of viewership and engagement from consumers, and also just the number of key opinion leaders across different career paths launching their own live streaming studios. Live streaming is really another way for brands to gain awareness and help move inventory, and even for small local businesses from craft artisans to independent farmers to reach new consumer base. And then live streaming is also all the more important in light of the pandemic and all the related lockdown restrictions, as it's a place for consumers not to only shop, but also be entertained at the same time. And we saw a lot of luxury brands doing live streaming, like Dior or Cartier. They have broadcasted private jewelry exhibits and fashion shows for consumers, so to see now and buy now. And then we're also seeing like museums doing live streaming tours, and coffee farmers even in Rwanda can sell a ton of their coffee beans in a 10-minute live stream with a key opinion leader.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting. And do you see that continuing even as we come out of the pandemic?
I think it's here to stay, at least for the time being. And it's really a great way for brands to engage with new customer base, because these KOLs are also looking to gain their own fan base. So I think finding the right one to partner with is a great way to acquire new customers for brands.
So now let's talk about what's happened during the pandemic, what you've learned from the pandemic, and what you think will stay after we're coming out of the pandemic, hopefully. Let's start with Travis. What did Allbirds do in their strategy during the pandemic? I know you started opening stores, at least in the US. I know you opened one in Philly. So what have you been doing during the pandemic, and what do you see that you've learned from that and you'll take into post-pandemic?
Yeah, a few things, I think. One, right from the start of the pandemic, our focus was on the health and safety of our employees. We shut our stores incredibly early. We kept them on board and really tried to make sure that they were sort of taken care of. As we started to reemerge, I think what we've learned is, one, customers are going to want that experience of an in-store visit. I think they're yearning for that. And that's one of the reasons why I think brick and mortar is poised to do well in this sort of post-pandemic world, or this sort of emergence from the pandemic. But I do think one of the things that we've seen and what we noticed in China before the pandemic is that mobile first mindset. And so it's something that we in the US are starting to think about more and more. We have now developed our own mobile app for Allbirds. We have augmented reality to try on our products. There's a lot of things that we've seen, even something as simple as QR codes, which have never resonated in the US, but now as we are sort of required to or need to open up menus at restaurants, I think there might be more of an appetite from the American consumer to use a QR code to get richer sort of product storytelling in a store off of that kind of tool. So I think there's a lot of things, but mobile first for us is big. And I would say one of the other things that gives us some really positive sort of signs is, as you mentioned, China's emerged quite well. And the other location we have a store is our spiritual home of New Zealand and Auckland, two of the countries that have probably done the best at sort of navigating the post-pandemic world. And we're seeing incredible results out of our brick and mortar locations there and our digital sort of business or e-commerce business. But it's a great sign for the rest of the world that as you start to emerge from the pandemic and really sort of tackle the virus, there's a really bright future ahead on the retail front.
Yeah, that is interesting about the QR codes. They've been trying forever to do it. And now that we've all been taught how quickly they can come up and how useful it is, you're seeing QR codes take off everywhere, not just in this retail world, but also on packages. There's QR codes that give a lot more information about the brand. It's very interesting how that's growing. So it sounds to me like you're saying you're not just really 100% investing in e-commerce, but it is a multi-channel, omni-channel kind of world, mobile first, stores, and then e-commerce. And you're opening physical stores, and that's important to the development of your brand.
Yeah. We opened 15 stores we'll open 15 stores this year and continue to invest alongside brick and mortar and digital and think it's sort of the best way for the customer as they choose to engage with us across any of our channels. We want to be there for them.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really interesting. Everybody's focusing on digital, and Allbirds and Amazon, for that matter, have been opening physical stores. So it's not really about just e-commerce. It's absolutely about focusing on the customer experience and being where the customer wants you to be when they want you to be there. And this idea of mobile first is super interesting, and augmented reality, we're starting to see that take off. So it'd be interesting to see. You're seeing your consumers really pick up on this augmented reality. That's a real thing.
It's a fun tool in our mobile app to allow someone to see and try the colors. And I think it's something that we're going to continue to test and learn from, but we've had great reception. Even in our stores, our associates can use that when they don't have that color available to help a customer see what it might look like on their feed. So I think it's a really cool and interesting tool that we'll continue to lean into.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting to see this technology take off. You know, like you said, QR codes. AR was been a little bit wonky, I think, but maybe now's the time for it. So Carl, how about you in luxury? So luxury kind of took a hit during the pandemic because when people are staying home in their pajamas or the sweatsuits, they may not need a luxury handbag. So what happened to you during the pandemic, and how do you see yourself coming out of it?
We were very fortunate in that our products are extremely versatile, and our brand pillar is really focused on the idea of a multifaceted woman with a very broad and diverse lifestyle. And so as a result, our products were always useful throughout the pandemic. You could take it for a hike or to the groceries. It's not always for commuting to work or for fancy parties and things like this. So we actually grew significantly through 2020. However, we did have a lot of supply chain challenges because, as I mentioned, we manufacture primarily in Europe. And so around this time last year, there was a lot of uncertainty about the Italy shutdown and when things will be up and running again. So there was a full 2.5 month shutdown with a lot of uncertainty. And that was a really stressful time for us. And we became very tight on inventory and had a lot of products that were sold out and on pre-order. I think the other thing that we were fortunate about was we had diversified geographically. So about 50% of our sales is outside of the US, with Asia being a huge growth market for us. And of course, certain regions in the world recovered more quickly, kind of back to normal versus others. And we really doubled down on those regions and those consumers during this time. We've also tried a lot of innovative new ways to connect with the consumer, including live streaming, which we've experimented with and have been really successful. And actually, in a couple of the recent ones that we did, we really outperformed some of the larger brands and more established luxury brands like a Fendi or a Celine, et cetera, which was really great data and feedback for us. And it was wonderful for brand awareness and discovery, because most of the people who purchased and engaged didn't actually hear about Senreve before. So it was a very effective marketing and customer acquisition tool for us, which we will continue to expand, especially in Asia. But that's another example of something that's quite innovative and forward thinking in China that we've actually brought to the US as well. So we've tried also to do live streaming from our flagship store in San Francisco, and that has been really successful too. So there's a lot of great cross-pollination and a lot of great innovation that goes in both directions for us. Which is quite unique and I think beneficial to our brand as we continue to develop globally.
So I am interested in that live streaming idea, because from what I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, in live streaming in China really did kind of start from a selling point of view. A lot of the really big KOLs in China who do live streaming were salespeople first. Whereas in the US, I think it's more starting from an entertainment base. And then maybe they bring products into the entertainment. So I think that focus is slightly different from China to the US. So what's been your experience in this cross-pollination? I mean, I think it's cool to take ideas from one culture to put it into another, but how does it work? Or what are the adjustments when you go in the Western market?
Well, for us, it's really focused on engagement and actually product knowledge, because we're still quite a young brand. It's really about our ability to storytell, explain our brand values, showcase our product, and our products are quite multifaceted themselves. And so in a live stream, we can explain how as a consumer, you could wear the bag in different ways. We could show it on different body types, which is always a key question. We can show all the different items and how you can organize it in the bag. So there's a lot of details that translate well. And of course, we can field questions real time, which is always really a fun way to engage. I think actually one of the biggest differences between China and US is, we are a women's empowerment brand. And so actually in the US, we have strict rules, for example, on social media, that we almost never feature men. It's always about featuring women. It's about highlighting women, telling their stories, etc. But in China, what's interesting is there's been a recent trend of male influencers and key opinion leaders who are quite popular amongst the female community. So we did break our rules a little bit in China and actually tested a few live streams with male celebrities and KOLs, which were extremely successful for us. So that was one of the key things that we actually debated internally, and whether or not that would still be authentic to our brand and how well that would translate.
Tony, I don't know if this is within what you cover or not, but can you speak a little to some of the inventory issues and the store issues and things that happened in China? I mean, you're talking mostly about e-commerce, but Alibaba does do new retail, and they really do think omni-channel. And can you speak to that? I'm not sure if that's in your expertise or not.
Yeah, I think a lot of our retail stores have become logistical fulfillment centers because a lot of our customers are shopping on mobile apps and they're in these major metropolitan areas. A lot of times they might be seeing something on a live stream or shopping online, and they can get delivered from a store inventory. So as you know, during the lockdown, when these stores were closed, we actually had store employees doing live streams themselves, because they know these products very, very well. So they can explain it to these consumers. And once if a purchase is made, the customer can come to the store and pick it up, like the curbside that we have now here in the US, or they can be delivered via our own logistics services and get it in same day, if not in an hour or two. So it's definitely more, I think, more flexible in terms of this online, offline, more integrated together. So there isn't like a huge difference between the two.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting how that's going. And you're starting to see a lot of the more forward thinking retailers here in the US do that. I know Walmart's put a lot of fulfillment into their stores. And of course, Amazon's always been kind of about that idea. But it is interesting to see that idea come to the US, which I know has been in China for a while. So let's talk a little bit before we take questions from the audience about the future. And let's start with Travis. What's your growth strategy? What now, hopefully we're out of COVID. You can think next 5 years, free consumers walking around doing whatever they want. What do you have as your growth strategy?
Yeah, I think we have a few things. That one, we've expanded quite far and wide on the international front. It's time for us to go deep in China as a market, certainly where we've started to go deep. We now have 20 folks on the ground at our Shanghai headquarters. We have stores that that have been open and potentially more planned, and as well as Europe and our primary market, the US. And I think from a channel strategy, we will continue to invest in the digital front, both sort of mobile app, even our sort of traditional digital e-commerce properties. But retail will be a big opportunity for us. And you mentioned at the beginning of the conversation the expense of digital marketing and how that's kind of begun to creep up more and more. And it's sort of outside of the control of the brand, that we want to find ways that we can engage and have more organic interactions. And we think the storefronts are going to be a great opportunity to build that community locally. And so brick and mortar will be a major part of our growth strategy going forward in the coming years.
Well, that's interesting. And Coral, what do you see as the future?
We are definitely continuing to grow globally and diversifying our customer base geographically. We have a lot of growth in China, obviously, but also other regions in Asia, as well as Europe. In terms of your comment about COVID being behind us, I'm not quite that optimistic, but I do feel like it's trending in the right direction. And so we are doing a lot more in terms of offline brick and mortar as well. We actually have now 2 stores in Hong Kong, one at Harbor City and one that will be opening at IFC next week. And then we have a store in Singapore that just opened, as well as currently a pop-up in Chengdu in China. And we'll be exploring more from that perspective as well. We're also really expanding our product assortment and have started to test in categories outside of the core handbag and accessories category as well. And through COVID, we've also really learned that it's important to diversify our supply chain. And so that's been a huge effort on our part to diversify our supply chain, as well as build up our global operational infrastructure. So those are things that we are doing from a team and company perspective that will set us up for a global scale.
Yeah, I think that's true, that I've heard a lot of people are now focusing in the future on supply chain operations, logistics, because that's a lot of what we learned during pandemic. Do you have any advice for some of that? I mean, you're saying you're focused on it, and you obviously went through some trials and tribulations during the pandemic. What are some of the things you've learned?
Well, one of the biggest challenges for us is that because our products are quite technical and difficult to produce at the quality that we want, we for a long time had very few manufacturers that we could partner with. And so one of the pieces of advice that I would say is that if you can, always try to diversify the manufacturing base and partnerships, not in a way that kind of depletes your resources, because of course, as an earlier stage company, it's really important to focus on different strategic partnerships. But for us, I would say that had we gone into COVID with a more diverse supply chain, I think it would have been incredibly helpful. The other piece of advice is just around inventory visibility and management. So for us, because we were a very focused assortment type of company with a lot of hero products, we didn't have crazy SKU proliferation or size proliferation, et cetera. We kind of got away with being fairly light on the systems investments. And so this year we realized that it was actually really critical for us to invest in those ERP and WMS systems. So we've now made those investments. So my other piece of advice is to get ahead of things on that, because it can end up really constraining growth if the infrastructure is not there.
Yeah, I could see that being a significant constraint. So Tony, what can you tell us about the future of retail from Alibaba? You guys have been ahead of the curve, in my opinion, for a really long time. And we've seen a lot of the big ideas that you had everybody else start following. So what's the next 5-10 years in retail look like?
Yeah, of course. I would love to just continue to highlight the opportunity in China. I think 2020 we all know, posed tough challenges to the global retail sector. So as a result, many brands and retailers are having to rethink about opportunities to go beyond their home markets, which it's been affected by COVID, to find growth abroad. And so in 2020, a lot of brands that we talked to say China was their fastest growing and most important market. And we even saw many brands entering the Chinese market in 2020 throughout this whole pandemic. And in fact, US companies actually had a record year on our marketplaces. In 2020, US brands made sales of more than 54 billion USD to Chinese consumers on our marketplaces. And I think one thing I also want to highlight is just the growing purchasing power of the Chinese consumers. There are around 350 million middle-class consumers in China, more than the entire US population, and that number is only going to continue to grow. They have these strong purchasing power, and they're looking for high quality products from around the world. So I think it's never been more important or easier for brands to go global and find growth in new markets.
Well, with that, let's take some questions from the audience. And one of the questions that came in from the audience was if Coral and Travis could discuss what it was like to actually get set up on Tmall Global. So exactly, more of the nitty gritty, exactly how that worked out. Travis, can you talk to that?
I may have to give a high level answer as I'm not on the e-commerce side and launch, but it was a pretty seamless process. It was something we started from the very beginning. We knew that Tmall was going to be our partners. We entered. I believe we did use some Tmall partners to help us and continue to sort of build that platform for us. But I wasn't involved in the nitty gritty of the implementation, though we continue to be really happy partners and work really well with the Tmall folks.
Coral, can you speak more specifically? Were you involved with them?
Yes, happy to. So we launched on Tmall Global last September, and I would say it was about a 3-month process before launch, where we started interviewing and meeting with different Tmall partners called TPs, and we got various proposals from different groups and selected one, and then we started doing the store design and some testing. And of course, there's various photography and content requirements. There's also inventory availability requirements. And so we wanted to make sure that the launch would be successful. So we took our time to prepare for that. And then we wanted to launch in September in advance of 11/11, which is obviously the Singles Day shopping holiday, which is the biggest shopping day of the year in China. So we wanted some time to accumulate awareness and followers and traffic to the store prior to that launch. And so we really started creating a lot of content and doing a lot of things off the Tmall platform to support the success of the launch as well. And then ultimately we had a very, very successful 11/11 shopping holiday. And that really propelled our momentum as a store and as a brand on Tmall Global, such that we're continuing to see significant growth beyond that as well.
Okay, so now some other questions we have from Russell here. I'll just read what he wrote. Many stores and brands with a more traditional model and brick and mortar stores have migrated, improved, or focused on direct-to-consumer efforts as a survival mechanism over the pandemic. Have these types of business caught up, or why do legacy direct-to-consumer brands still have a leg up? Can you compare the distinctions between a hybrid versus a direct-to-consumer only business? And is there friction between the two sides? So I guess this question is really looking about what happens when you go direct or you have this hybrid model and things like that. And Travis, you were talking a lot about this mix back and forth. Is there friction between any of this, or what do you think? How does that work?
Yeah, I think for us as a sort of direct consumer, I'll speak mainly about the US, we have the sort of luxury of acting and moving as quickly or slowly as we'd like. We're not beholden to a wholesale sort of buy process. And so for us, that gives us, we're a lot more nimble in every aspect of our business. I think someone who's in that hybrid mode and those larger legacy brands that are trying to pivot, It is. It's a bit difficult. Your sort of sales org, your merchandising buy org. There's a lot of groups and teams that are designed and built from an organizational standpoint to handle that wholesale business. And you see some large, again, legacy retailers that are really starting to pivot. Nike's a good example, and others out there. But it is a challenge. I think sometimes the two can be at odds when you have people trying to sell into a wholesale channel, but also market direct in that same region or same city, and those two can be at odds and create some conflict or tension. But we're fortunate that we've decided to go direct 100% and in the U.S., so we don't have that sort of conflict or tension ourselves.
Yeah, that's interesting you mentioned Nike, because Nike's been making a lot of headlines with their idea of going direct and getting rid of some of their wholesalers and really focusing only a few wholesalers and really pushing their direct business, and figuring out how to navigate with those different partners and manage that hybrid model. It's an interesting problem. Coral, do you have a perspective on this? The tension between the hybrid approach, going direct or working with partners? Or
yes, I think there's definitely tension, and I think it's difficult to manage. To Travis's point, there are a lot of cultural and organizational challenges in terms of having a lot of bureaucratic inefficiencies and things like that. For us, we really do think about it as more of a strategic partnership. What is the brand value, or what is the kind of impact of those partnerships? It's not a pure kind of distribution relationship. So we've done some creative partnerships there. For example, Senreve products were sold at Apple stores globally. Some of the top stores, for example, Champs-Élysées or Hong Kong IFC, et cetera. And that was a unique partnership that we felt would be important for brand visibility and credibility. But we are very open-minded to these types of things, but they're really quite one-off. And also, we have our own product development and product launch calendar. So we want to make sure that we don't fall into the trap of starting to service a different group of consumers, which are, the buyers at the traditional retailers, and still, as much as possible, have them adapt to our calendar and schedule, and be comfortable with our product release cadence and so forth.
Yeah, that makes sense. Let's pivot a little bit, because we have an interesting question here, which we really haven't discussed much. From Raj, he's asking about how the different brands have actioned access to customer data and how you've worked with Alibaba. Let's start with Tony a little bit with what your procedure is in working with these brands on the data. And then let's go to Coral and Travis for their specific examples about this.
Yes, for sure. I think, for a lot of brands, especially DTC brands, like having data is very important to kind of guide their decision making. So we as a platform, we actually share many important data that includes brands' own sales information and also macro category trends. So these brands can better tailor their strategies and planning accordingly. So that is something that for all of our brands that have a flagship store, that they have access to a backend data in terms of sales, traffic, as well as a CRM management system to kind of track their customer demographics.
Okay, so let's talk specifically about the data that you guys have gotten from Tmall and how you've used it. Travis, how has that data been? Because you have your direct to the end user data, but now you also have data working with Alibaba. How has that worked out?
Yeah, I think some of the benefits of Tmall, and again, I'm not as close to the direct side on the e-commerce partnership, but understanding things like ratings and reviews and really pulling that information in and understanding where we sit within the Tmall sort of broader ecosystem has been really valuable, especially I think Coral mentioned earlier, understanding how we need to adapt or change our brand or business, the products that are resonating with our consumers in China, which can be very different from the US. So some of that information that surfaces and that we get on the back end is really helpful, again, at a high level to make sure we're positioning ourselves properly in the market.
So Coral, you did speak to this, but do you have more to add about it?
Yeah, I think the geographic and demographic data is really important to understand. So, for example, the Chinese consumer for us right now is actually on average about 10 years younger than our US consumer. And so that's really helpful information for us to have. We also got a lot of great feedback around not just our product, but our packaging and so forth. So we've really upped our game from the packaging perspective for the Asia market and the China market in particular. So there's quite a few things that we've made improvements on or changes based on the data. And I would say there's also actually quite a lot of transparency around kind of competitive benchmarking and things like this. So that's been really interesting information to have as well.
So that you can get information on competitive benchmarking, that is pretty interesting. And that comes straight from Alibaba, that information?
Yeah, we get it through Alibaba and through our TP.
That's great. So let me go back to you again, Coral, and then we'll go to Travis on this one. So Laura has asked how T-Mobile Global has supported you from a supply chain and fulfillment perspective. Now, you talked about this being a challenge, and how have you benefited from the relationship with T-Mobile in this aspect?
So I think part of the reason why we decided to go with T-Mobile Global was related to this flexibility around inventory, that we are able to have our products offshore and ship into China, whereas the Tmall China platform requires in-country fulfillment, so having significant inventory based onshore in China. And so as a result of that, we were able to launch more quickly and not have to make a big inventory commitment given how expensive our products are. So that was the main benefit in terms of working with Tmall Global.
Yeah, that is a big benefit. Travis, how about you? Can you speak to any of the supply chain issues that you have?
Yeah, slight nuance for us is we have really planted a flag in China. So we have a warehouse in China. We manufacture around the world, but pull our inventory and have depth of inventory there. So because we have our own stores and our own channels that we need to fulfill, we have placed inventory in market and leverage that. But the specific to Tmall, not as close to, but yeah, we run and operate our own stores, so need our inventory local.
And Tony, do you have anything to add from the Alibaba point of view on this?
Yeah, so we have a dedicated supply chain team that helps our brands and merchants to forecast inventory needs, especially as we're actually coming up on a big promotion campaign for our 6/18 mid-year shopping festival. So we're helping brands to forecast the needs based on past data as well. And we also have a full logistic network across the globe, actually, that can help brands get the goods into bundle warehouses or ship directly from the US to the end consumer in China.
Okay, so let's see, what else do we have here? I saw earlier we had a question about from Alvaro to both Travis and Coral. How do you feel about retail as service stores, where you get independent stores partnering with direct-to-consumer brands to tell a brand story, deliver the brand experience, and give the brands that customer data? Is that a tool either one of you have used? Coral, have you used any of that as a tool?
It's interesting. We have been approached by different kind of multi-brand retailers or different kind of experimentations around retail locations or kind of real estate players that have kind of store incubations and things like this, kind of like what you described, retail as a service. We have tested a few of these, and I think there are quite a few things that are challenging about it. So the first thing is there's a staff training issue in terms of, again, part of the goal of having a retail offline experience is to be able to create that storytelling, that community, the authenticity, and the expression of the brand. So it's quite difficult when it's not people who are directly on your team and trained and have that level of product and brand knowledge. I think the other thing that's challenging is you have to, for us as a premium luxury product and brand, the positioning is really important. So which other products are included. It's sometimes confusing, for example, that we have $1,000 price point product next to I don't know, $3 or $5 razors and $10 lipsticks, and it gets a little bit confused. So I think the concept is interesting, and we've certainly tried it, but it hasn't been a major focus for us because we feel like there are some friction points.
How about you, Travis? Have you tried this, retail as a service?
Yeah, we've also been approached, and I think for certain brands, it may be a move to allow them to really dip their toes in the water without fully committing. But we've made the commitment and have built a robust team here at HQ to do it on our own, and that's globally. So we're probably not the right candidate for that type of service at this point, but it certainly can be the right move for certain types of brands.
So another trend that's happening, and Vinam has asked about this, is the notion of using, all these different channels, these digital channels for one-on-one consultation, really to provide 24/7 customer service. You definitely are seeing this on the luxury side. I don't know if you as brands are using it, but I know like some of the department stores here in the US, like Neiman and things, are using that kind of stuff. So have you used this channel for one-on-one consultation and personalized selling? Coral, have you used that?
Yes, we do have 24/7 client concierge team that we manage in-house. And it's, again, really important for us, for all of our teammates, to have that product knowledge and be able to communicate directly with our clients in a way that is knowledgeable and elevated and helpful. And we're not a super high volume based driven business. We're focused on engagement and overall lifetime value and loyalty. And so that investment has been really critical for us.
Travis, have you done anything like that in Allbirds?
We've actually tested it, and we tested in the European market to allow that one-to-one from sort of an e-commerce consultation or experience where we leverage the store sort of visuals and the team members. We found it creates a little bit of tension between serving the customer in the store and trying to find time for the customer online. I think it's something we may explore more intentionally in the future, but that dual purpose of utilizing in-store team members to serve and help with that online consultation, I think there's potential, but we haven't cracked that nut yet, and are sort of moving back to more focus on the in-store customer there.
Okay, let's see what else we have here. This is an interesting question, getting right back to the financials on this. So someone in the audience has asked whether the Tmall global business is more or less profitable compared to the US business, and how are the margins in China or on Tmall versus US. So let's get into some of the nitty gritties of the cost differentials. So Coral, can you talk to that?
Yes, it's definitely something that we continue to think about how to manage. So the first thing that we have done is there is a slight price difference in China for our products on Tmall Global versus our retail price points in the US. And it's a lot driven by the duties and taxes because of our price point. I think the second thing that we are currently really focused on from a margin improvement perspective is improving our overall logistics and fulfillment costs. And then lastly, I think, one of the challenges, of course, with having more intermediaries is that it does eat into the margin. And so we have been thinking about, product localization and having a slightly different overall cost structure for China. So this is a great question. And these are definitely things that we're constantly talking about as a team.
Yeah, absolutely. This gets right down to some of the issues about going direct. We started with where you can control your price more. Now you've got another partner. Travis, how have you guys handled this?
Yeah, I can't talk to specific financials on our side, but I can say from sort of a broader China perspective, we're leaning heavily into all of our channels there. Our stores are performing better than pre-COVID. The e-commerce side of our business has doubled in the past year. So we're going and continuing in all channels, but can't talk to the specific financials.
Okay, so very important topic and of big interest. Let me switch gears again. We just have a few minutes left, but let's get to this issue of ratings and reviews and how you curate truthful and recommended reviews. And before I go to the brands, let me go to Tony on this. What do you guys do about reviews and ratings and things like that? How do you manage all of that?
So everything's open on our platforms, and it's up to the brands and their own store customer service team to manage reviews and feedback from consumers. I do want to say that consumer engagement and consumer satisfaction is very important, especially in the Chinese market. So it's very important for a brand to have a full and educated and equipped customer service team to help consumers address questions pre-sale, during the sale, and even after sale service. So it's really, we leave it to the brands to help engage with these consumers and answer their questions and address any of the concerns and any of the negative reviews. But we can also step in to help the brands if needed as well.
Yeah, because from what I understand, as important as reviews are in the US, it's really, really important in China and managing that discussion. Travis, I see you took your microphone off. Do you want to talk to that?
I'll just say we believe really strongly. It's something that word of mouth had and sort of the connection there to ratings online has been a critical part of why we've grown, and that trusted relationship with someone or maybe at least someone who's not officially connected to the brand is giving an unbiased rating. So for us, I think we have a 4.9 rating on Tmall, which we're extremely proud about. We have reviews on our US e-commerce channel, and that word of mouth sort of evangelism, I think, stems from having such high ratings, and it's a big part of our business. And in the US, also tied to NPS experiences of the store and the website are things that we track religiously at Allbirds.
Yeah, that's a really different way of thinking about retail, peer to peer, customer to customer, and what that conversation's about. How about you, Carl? How important is it to your brand?
Yes, it's absolutely critical and very similar to Allbirds. We do track various customer metrics, including NPS as well. And I think a couple things that are really important related to this. So first of all, we don't want people to think that this is just purely a marketing gimmick, right? So we do actually take the feedback very seriously. We respond to people, and whether or not it's public or private, we make sure that they feel that their feedback was valued and responded to and heard. And we actually do make a lot of significant modifications and innovations based on a lot of this feedback. And so all of this, again, relates to why it's important for us to have this direct to consumer business model in terms of that direct interaction and engagement, such that there is something that we could do about this feedback. And we are getting feedback real time all the time. And that's a core part of our DNA.
Yeah, so it's not just customers talking to each other, but it also provides important feedback back to you. It is interesting the role ratings and reviews have played in retail recently, and definitely accelerated by the pandemic. Well, we're running out of time. So with that, let me give every one of our panelists a chance to make some closing remarks. Let's start with Tony.
Great. Thanks again for this opportunity. I think I just want to close by saying that for Alibaba Group and Tmall Global, our mission remains to make it easy to do business anywhere. So we're here for US brands and brands from around the world. We have a local team here in the US and can be a great resource and be utilized as your free market entry consultants. So I look forward to connecting with many of the brands out there who are interested in China. Thank you.
Okay. How about you, Travis?
I just want to say thanks, Barbara. And for us, I think our mission of continuing to lessen our impact on the world and reduce our carbon footprint is something critical. And we've recently released our own carbon measuring tool. So we encourage any of the brands out there or folks trying to figure out how to start their own sort of path to sustainability or being more sustainable to take a look at that and start to measure, reduce and offset your carbon impact.
Yeah, that's interesting because that's accelerated during the pandemic too. It's independent of COVID, but we've seen a lot more importance put on sustainability, and then to figure out how to incorporate that in your own business and keep your price points manageable is a pretty interesting thing to think about. So thanks for that thought. And how about you, Carl? Do you have some final remarks?
Thanks, Barbara. Thanks everyone for joining. I think for us, it's been a really important lesson that we've learned through 2020 and also beyond in terms of how important it is to continue having a global mindset as we build a next generation luxury brand. I would encourage a lot of the US-based entrepreneurs to think more globally and really think about how your business could adapt to the different needs of consumers around the world.
Yeah, so in conclusion, we're at the end of the hour now. So let's just talk about the optimism we're seeing. Some of the different retail brands reported numbers in the last couple of days, and the numbers are looking good. Apparel is moving up. We may not be, as Carl says, we may not be totally out of COVID, but it does seem like it's an optimistic, pleasant future going forward. And what I think has been a fantastic thing about the pandemic is the level of innovation. A lot of people say constraints foster creativity. And although there's been incredible hardship, there has been interesting innovation in the merging of online, offline, the use of AR. We mentioned the QR codes, the new use of technology, the ways of creating community, the growth of live streaming, so many interesting trends in retailing. I think it's going to be an exciting next year, and I personally can't wait to go shopping. And with that, I'd like to express our gratitude to our audience for attending today. We hope the session was insightful. Thank you, panelists, for your time and sharing your expertise with us. And thank you, XRC Labs, for your partnership with us at the Baker Retailing Center at the Wharton School. Thank you very much.